And get started. I'd like to thank everyone for coming out. My name is Kern Jackson, Director of the African American Studies Program here at the University of South Alabama. And I'm really glad we're having this is our 10th annual MLK keynote address for our program. But before we get started, we're very fortunate to have our new president to join us this evening. And President Joe Biden is going to say a few words, if you would, sir.
Dr. Jackson, thank you very much.
You're quite welcome.
Dr. Padgett, welcome again.
Thanks.
Glad to have you in Mobile and at the University of South Alabama.
Good to be here.
And to each of y'all, thank you very much. I'm still getting my way, learning my way around campus. I only got lost twice trying to get to the building. Dean, it's great to be in the College of Humanities and School of Humanities and the College of Arts and Sciences. And it's really an honor for me to join Dr. Billingsley and other leaders in the administration to be a part of the culmination of this weekend, National Weekend of Celebration of Life and Legacy, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And if it were not for him and his example, we might not be here today. And so to have a distinguished speaker coming from Tennessee State, talking about something that is important to each and every one of us is a real honor for the University of South Alabama to host. And without further ado, we want to thank you again for being here and look forward to your presentation.
Thank you. All right, so as I do this introduction, I'm just going to use my loud mouth instead of getting mic'd up. But again, we'd like to welcome you. I want to acknowledge my colleagues, Dr. Wisbicki and Dr. Harrington, Dr. Hal Brooks, and Dr. Billingsley for being present, and Dr. Carr. But more importantly, I'd like to welcome the students. It's really important that you guys show up for these sort of stimulating intellectual conversations and take in the instruction and the message. So we have Dr. David A. Padgett here with us today. Now, before I get into the list of his long accomplishments, I want you to know that freedom fighters and people who help to extend democracy and maintain open conversations come in all types, right? Not just folks who's up in the humanities building. Often there are scientists, our soft scientists and our hard scientists. And Dr. Padgett is one of these folks. Brother Padgett comes to us from Tennessee State University, where he's assistant professor of geography and director of the Geographic Information Sciences Laboratory up there in Nashville. He has served as the Global Learning and Observations to Benefit the Environment organization, which is a partner and trainer at TSU since 2001. Brother Padgett has executed instruction for his students and multiple community-based global positioning systems. What he does is he maps things to improve public transit, accessibility. He also helps to use GIS to investigate homeless populations. Okay, he does mapping for entities such as the Red Cross and in their emergency shelters. Now, this GIS lab that he has developed, it works with grassroots groups, such as our very own local Mobile organization called CHESS. And CHESS stands for Clean, Healthy, Educated, Safe, and Sustainable. And what CHESS does is it advocates for environmental ethics out there in Africatown. Brother Padgett also works with nonprofit organizations and governmental agencies. Many of the students of Dr. Padgett has taught over the last 20 years have graduated and are gainfully employed as geographers and GIS specialists. Since 1992, Padgett has been the owner and chief consultant and CEO of GEO Mental, a multifaceted environmental consulting firm. His current and recent clients include Air Alliance Houston, Nashville Davidson County Metropolitan Government, Black Enterprise Magazine, Catalyst Miami, and the Southern Coalition for Southern Social Justice. Now, in April of 2019, Brother Padgett was awarded the American Association of Geographers Presidential Achievement Award for, quote, significant contributions in advancing geography, GIS, and STEM education within the historically Black college and university community. In September of 2019, he He was named the EthicalGEO Fellow by the American Geographical Society in support of his project entitled Democratizing Geospatial Technology, a model for providing technical assistance and community-based preparatory mapping to environmental justice stakeholder communities. And in February 2020, Padgett was named 2020 Youth Learning as Citizen Environmental Sciences, Inc. Award. Now, this presentation on the day covers an excellent example of how a historically Black college and university can provide technical assistance to environmental justice communities. The title of today's talk is Creating a Beloved Community for Africatown with Technology-Based Service Learning. And that's something we do here at the University of South Alabama as well, this service learning, this community-based learning, because after all, we have to turn our talents back on the place in which we live. And without further ado, I'd like to invite you to give a round of applause to Dr. David Padgett.
Thank you. It's good to be here in Mobile, Alabama. I even picked up a souvenir, this cane. I was telling Dr. Jackson, it used to be when I was younger and competing in the old Ohio Valley Conference in track and field and cross country. I knew when I was injured, you know, I got down a flight of steps, stepped in a pothole. In this case, I just woke up. Foot was sore, kept getting sore. I had no idea. So went to the local Walgreens and got this cane and a souvenir from Mobile that I hope to get rid of as soon as possible. So bear with me. So when you know, Dr. Jackson invited me to come, I thought that the best topic would be one associated with my work in Mobile. And I've been working here in this community since about 2016, primarily around the Africatown community, working with the CHESS organization through the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice, primarily looking at the ways to mitigate the impacts of all the industrialization that surrounds the Africatown community. And then, of course, the Clotilda was discovered or rediscovered, and that brought on a whole new level of work, which I'm going to describe in this presentation. And Dr. Jackson asked me, well, can you tie your work to Dr. King's philosophy, which was interesting because it took me back to a couple of decades of my work surrounding, to some degree, the beloved community and geographical information systems technology, and of course, service learning. And so service learning, some of you students have probably been involved in going out into the community, helping the community solve problems. And then there's an exchange of information where you learn something from the community, and obviously they learn something from the university and its resources. And so that's all part of this title, Creating a Beloved Community for Africatown with Technology-Based Service Learning. And so I'm going to take you mostly on a chronological tour through my experience in these topics, specifically with the beloved community. And as you can see from this quote, our goal is to create a beloved community, said Dr. King, and this will require a qualitative change in our souls as well as a quantitative change in our lives. And so the question that we're trying to answer during this talk is, how do we take a qualitative issue such as quality of life and quantify it? Because as much as we would like to believe that problem solving can be done purely subjectively, purely using qualitative information, we know that at the end of the day, especially now, technology has to be involved as we figure out ways to improve our communities. And so, getting down to the first part of our talk, you know, the beloved community, what is it? And here is just something that I took from the King Center, and I'll read it. The beloved community is a term that was first coined in the early days of the 20th century by the philosopher theologian Hosea Royce who founded the Fellowship of Reconciliation. However, it was Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., also a member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation, who popularized the term and invested with a deeper meaning, which has captured the imagination of people of goodwill all over the world. For Dr. King, the beloved community was not only a lofty utopian goal to be confused with the rapturous image of the peaceful kingdom in which lions and lambs coexist in idyllic harmony. Rather, the beloved community was for him a realistic, achievable goal that could be attained by a critical mass of people committed to and trained in the philosophy and methods of nonviolence. Dr. King's beloved community is a global vision which all people can share in the wealth of the earth. In the beloved community, poverty, hunger, and homelessness will not be tolerated because international standards of human decency will not allow. So taken from this passage, you have this, again, almost utopian, very idealistic philosophy and vision. And when Dr. King looked at it, he looked at it somewhat pragmatically. You know, how can we create this beloved community? How can we maximize our quality of life, not in terms of who we are, but also where we are? You know, we can actually have an impact upon our surroundings if we do the right things, if we improve upon that. And so that's what this work and this presentation is really all about. So here are some of the threats to the beloved community in urban America. You know, all of us have experienced these things. Racial wealth and opportunity gaps. We know that, you know, there's a lot of inequality out there in terms of wealth. We know a very small percentage of people in this country control over 90% of the wealth, right? Unequal access to broadband Wi-Fi and technology. Some of you probably experienced that firsthand. If you were maybe a first year student this year who was in high school last year trying to go to school online, and perhaps your community didn't have broadband Wi-Fi and you struggled to keep up, or maybe you were unable to keep up at all, which should not happen in supposedly the wealthiest country, one of the wealthiest countries in the world. Racial achievement gaps in the science, technology, engineering, and math disciplines. This is critical because, you know, we know that although there are many paths to success, in many cases, whether you're in art, whether you're in music, whether you're in history, there has to be some application of technology in order for an individual to maximize his or her ability to support him or herself financially. Unequal access to walkable space and green spaces. There are some communities that have trees, parks, playgrounds, and there are other communities that simply do not. And so that's not a good thing. Inner city, I'm going to be a little interactive at points here. Inner city gentrification and green gentrification. So we have some pretty bright students here. How many students are here today? Any student tell me, what is gentrification in one sentence? Anybody? Don't embarrass your president. Yes.
It's a sense of revitalizing, or sort of kind of revitalizing an area.
Okay, why is it controversial?
Because it typically revitalizes redlined areas, a lot of urban or low income areas.
Okay, she threw a term in there, redline. What's redline?
It's where certain resources such as banks or insurance and some form of resources aren't accessible to that particular community.
Okay, what's your name?
Deidre.
Deidre, okay, this is math. Yeah, good job, Deidre. Yeah, so gentrification is, we break the word down. The word gentry means an elite class. And so gentrification is when basically wealthy people take over property in lower income communities, tax rates go up, housing values go up. The people who used to live in those communities have to leave. And so they don't get to enjoy all the amenities that come with revitalization, right? What's green gentrification? It's a tough one. Okay, green gentrification is kind of a new term. So what if you, let's say you go to a community and there's this vacant lot there, full of trash cans, garbage, just broken glass. And then the city decides to turn it into a multi-use park with walking trails, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now it's transformed into a green space, adding to the quality of life of that community. What's going to happen to the property values around that new park? They're going to go up or down? They're going to go up, way up. So once again, on one hand, great. We just got a new park in our low-income community. Oh, now we no longer can afford to live here because there's something called a view shed. A view shed is what you see when you look out of your window. Now, how many of you all, I don't know, maybe you all kind of, I don't know, you college students are different. I was a broke college student. Used to be on Fridays, the party was $2, or we could hang out in Crystals and get $1.99 Crystals combo meal. Couldn't do both because I only had $2. You college students go spring break. So if you're going on spring break, what kind of hotel room do you want when you go to Miami or what kind of room do you want? What view do you want? What do you want to see out of your window? Ocean what? Ocean front view. Okay. Now, if you have another room that's looking at the side of the hotel next to you, which one of those two rooms is going to be more expensive?
Ocean beach.
The ocean front view. So the view of a property can, in some cases, increase its value about to $30,000 or $40,000. Just what you see out of your window can change the value of a piece of property. And so in many cases, when the view shed, instead of looking at a vacant lot, the trash, garbage, and broken glass, when that turns into a nice, idyllic park, those property values go up immediately, just like that. And so that's called green gentrification, where we, the pathway that, see, we have some minors, the pathway to HELL is paved with good intentions sometimes, probably old enough to spell, but green gentrification, great, new park, darn it, we can't afford to live here. There's urban food insecurity and food deserts. What's a food desert? Come on. Okay, it's kind of a tricky term. Are there communities where you have to travel a long way to get to? I saw a Winn-Dixie. I haven't seen a Winn-Dixie in forever. Long way to get to a Winn-Dixie, or maybe we have Kroger down here. Maybe you have to travel miles to get to a grocery store like that. Anybody ever hear of communities like that? But those are called food deserts. Or you might think, oh, it's just an inconvenience. So what? I don't have a full service grocery store in my community. Well, research has shown that communities that do not have access to fully functional grocery stores, so instead of going to Winn-Dixie, you're going to KFC, Popeyes, or McDonald's. And of course, after a while, that dietary, well, who's going to call it a choice, that lack of dietary choice results in lower life expectancy, obesity, diabetes, and other problems directly associated with where a person lives, directly associated with the quality of life in your community. And then, of course, we've heard about this whole infrastructure issue lately in the news. And of course, decaying infrastructure is a problem. So I've listed a whole lot here. Can anybody think of any other threats to the beloved community in urban America? I don't want to just stand up here and talk the whole time. Anything.
Guns.
Crime. Yeah, crime. I mean, that's definitely, is there a relationship between crime and green space? Yes or no? Absolutely. I mean, communities that have more trees and green space tend to have less crime. Is the relationship between green space and health? Absolutely. More trees, lower stress, all kinds of things that happen. So the beloved community is actually a mitigation of all of these threats, and how do we go about doing that? And how do we go about doing that collectively? And so really, now this is where I said it took me back a ways. When Dr. Jackson asked me to tie this in with Dr. King, and I thought I started thinking about the beloved community. And so now I have to go all the way back. Many years ago, I was involved with Black Enterprise magazine. I used to read Kiplinger's magazine. How many of you have ever heard of a magazine called Forbes? Forbes, you've heard of Business Week. All these magazines every year take a quantitative approach to ranking urban quality of life. I also used to subscribe to Black Enterprise magazine. Black Enterprise magazine would rank cities' quality of life from a qualitative basis, and it wasn't scientific. Now, the other magazines, the best cities in the United States, let me put that in quotes, would be, oh, Portland, Oregon. That was the best city. One year it was Providence, Rhode Island, right? One year it was like Bloomington, Indiana. You know, not a whole lot of African Americans in those cities. Said, wow, what if we approached quality of life differently? What if we posed some different questions? What if Black Enterprise magazine posed the question differently? Would we get different results? I think so, because, or like it or not, different people see space differently. Different people see quality of life differently. Different genders see quality of life differently. I was on a college campus a few years ago, and there was a mapping experiment. And the question was asked of students, where do you feel safe on campus, right? Now, the male students felt safe just about everywhere. The female students, there was hardly anywhere on campus where they felt safe. It was a completely different visualization of fear, right? And I never thought about that. I mean, there were places like, I just never thought, as a man, you just don't think of the backside of a building as being unsafe, or just walking across a courtyard, right, as being unsafe. But what if you're a woman out there alone, right? You might have a completely different visualization. And what happened was it led to that campus going on a lighting campaign, because the number one thing that the women on campus said was places where it's dark, where you cannot see at night. That's what caused the most fear. And so the campus went about lighting up that campus to make it feel safer for everybody. You know, so everybody sees space differently. You know, if there was a Latinx magazine that did this, you'd probably have a different set of cities at Black Enterprise, and so on and so on. If there was an Italian magazine, so on and so forth. But because I was subscribing to Black Enterprise, I wrote them a letter and said, why don't you all do a scientific ranking of the best cities? It used to be that a bunch of editors would sit in a room and say, oh, I went to Annapolis, Maryland last year. It was great. Seemed like a great place for Black people. Okay, let's put that on the list. It was very subjective, right? I said, no, let's use some numbers. The editor, amazingly, if anybody up here ever do any freelance writing, normally when you pitch, that's called a pitch. When you pitch something, I didn't even pitch it. I just asked them to do it. Normally you don't get an answer back. Black Enterprise editor wrote me back and said, wow, this is a great idea. We don't know anyone who's able to do that. I said, I know somebody who could. So for the next 8 years, I was involved in developing these best cities lists for Black Enterprise magazine, and it only ended because of the recession. Once the recession hit in 2008, print media was unable to hire outside consultants. That's the only reason that the series ended. And of course, we got different cities. So I developed something called the Urban Quality of Life Index, specifically for African Americans. So for instance, we it was a combination of qualitative and quantitative data that resulted in this index. An index is a number that represents a value relative to a fact. So for instance, let's say safety, right? So in a mainstream publication, an individual might be asked, how safe do you feel in your community, right? How safe do you feel on a scale of 1 to 100, right? Yeah, we asked that question. But for Black enterprise readers, we asked the second question. How do you feel about the relationship between African Americans and police in your community? And it's very hard to describe. I mean, I can't even describe to you, maybe me, Brother Kern, Brother Jackson, maybe this brother over here. When those blue lights come up behind you and you're an African American man, you got your light flashing before your eyes, especially if you're alone at night. It's a completely different situation. It's a completely different relationship. You don't think, oh, here comes the, oh, yes, officer, you're coming to protect and serve you. No, no. How many of you all have ever been pulled over and had a felony stop thrown on? Felony stop. Like when you pull over, get out the car, hands behind your head. Anybody? I'm the only one? Oh, see, look who raised a hand, right? Look who raised a hand. You know, you're just driving down the street. Next thing you know, you got guns drawn on you. And then you ask questions, you know, and we saw what happened to George Floyd, right? All of us unfortunately saw that. So we have to ask different questions. Also, for anybody, we have to look at subjective data, and then we have to look at quantitative data. So again, if we ask people, how safe do you feel in your community, right? Now, Philadelphia is the city where you have the highest percentage of people who have only lived in Philadelphia. They have never lived any place else. So they don't have a good frame of what? Reference. So how many of y'all been to North Philly? Oh, never been to North Philly? I'm from Baltimore, Maryland. There's only about 2 places I've been nervous. Baltimore, Maryland, Gary, Indiana, right? Watts, and North Philly. Now, there's something that we call being tried, okay? Let's say you go to some place like Southeast DC, Southside Chicago, people will try you. So in North Philly, as soon as I got out of my car, somebody said, what's up? Seems pretty innocent, doesn't it? Maybe he's just saying hello. If you are in North Philly and somebody says, what's up? You better have an answer. Your answer can't be, oh my God, I don't know what's up. What's gonna be up is your wallet, your watch. If you show any fear, you're gonna be taken advantage of, right? So, but if you ask somebody who only lived in North Philadelphia, that's their neighborhood, and you ask them, how safe do you feel on a scale of 1 to 100, with 1 being, I don't feel safe at all, 100 feel are absolutely safe, they might tell you, oh, 80 or 90, because they've only been where? They've only been in North Philly. I grew up in Baltimore. When I left Baltimore and I moved to Nevada, I couldn't sleep. I couldn't sleep. It was too quiet. I was used to, hey. You know, me and my dad would sit up and say, well, what was that? Sound like a Mac 11? No, I don't know. It sounded like maybe a 38. You know, we're sitting, this is what we do, right? But would you feel safe if you? No, probably not, you know? But that's just normality to some people, right? So you can't just go by an individual's opinion about his or her quality of life in terms of safety if they've never lived anywhere else, and hearing sirens and yelling and fighting and gunshots is just normal, right? That's just normal, right? So we had to throw in a balance and weight it against actual FBI crime index statistics. Say, yeah, you feel safe in your neighborhood, but it's not safe, okay? You know, it's not safe. And so we had to balance a quantitative and qualitative methodology in order to determine quality of life quantitatively, specifically for African Americans in urban areas. Then we ranked the cities and got the results. And it was really a popular magazine. You know, everybody wants to learn about his or her community. Now, because of the popularity of Black enterprise, a person got in touch with specifically Bernice King, right? Dr. King's daughter, who somehow heard about this guy who is able to quantify qualitative quality of life information for Black Enterprise Magazine. And she said, I want you to develop a quantitative methodology to define my father's beloved community. So what's so interesting is you just brought this up. I'd almost forgotten about this. So this is actually the contract. This is 2013. And so this was the part of the breakdown of the development of the beloved community index and blah, 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 science. You know, I guess the deliverable will be a beloved community index methodology that can be replicated in communities across the US as a means of visibly delineating the beloved community. Of course, the beloved community being ideal. The maps will reveal where and how communities can focus upon efforts to reach the ideal. Unfortunately, this project never came to fruition. And it was largely because at the time, unfortunately, now I'm an only child, so I didn't understand what was going on between Bernice King and her brothers at the time, but there was a lot of conflict. Like I said, I don't understand it. For a while, I lived with two sisters, and I would go to work in the morning, and they would be at each other's throats. I'm thinking, are they gonna kill each other? I come back home from work, they're sitting on the porch. I'm like, are y'all all right? They say, are you all right? I'm like, what was that this morning? So I don't understand. So I had to call my friends that have siblings and say, did y'all used to fight like cats? And oh yeah, especially sisters. We're at each other's throats. And then in the morning, in the afternoon, we're good. So Bernice King and her brothers had a conflict over some of her father's property. You can read about it. And that conflict essentially became so great that it just derailed this whole project, unfortunately. But I still have the concept of the beloved community quantifying. So fast forward to 2019, this is where I started I was awarded the EthicalGEO Democratizing Geospatial Technology project. And it's interesting that it's about ethics. So what are the ethics of technology? And so we're democratizing technology. We want everybody specifically to be able to use geospatial information systems, which is a powerful tool. Powerful tool. How many of you all have ever caught Uber or Lyft? Of course you have, right? What do you see when you get ready to catch? What do you see on your phone?
All the lips.
What is more a map? You see a map on your phone. That's a smart map. So just about everybody can use that technology, but that technology that you use to get an Uber or Lyft is used to figure out where to put COVID testing sites, to figure out where your UPS should go, figure out where grocery stores should be placed, to determine perhaps where a McDonald's should go. Quick question. McDonald's is what kind of company? What's their main business? Let's take a guess. What is it? Nope, it's real estate. McDonald's is a real estate company that happens to sell a few hamburgers. It's a real estate company, right? And they are a voracious user of geospatial technology. They don't just go out and say, hey, this looks like a good place to sell some burgers. All right, let's break ground here. No, it's a very, very, very intricate process using maps. But when people in communities want to make their communities better, there's no more powerful tool than maps. And so, but is this technology accessible to everybody? Not really. So my goal in this project, as you can see here, is to get regular folks, walk the community, use these maps. And in this case, I was working in the Overtown community in Miami, which is an historically Black community, which is being threatened by gentrification. And so by creating a map and a map-based app, the community-based organizations and stakeholders in Overtown are able to produce a visualization showing that we are here, we have history that should not be erased by new development. We shouldn't be gentrified out of existence. And in fact, we should be able to utilize these resources for something that we call heritage tourism. So keep that in mind, heritage tourism. So that when people come to Miami, not only do they go to the beach or South Beach or wherever, but they also come to Overtown. Maybe stay in a bed and breakfast in Overtown, not an Airbnb, but an actual bed and breakfast where you can stay here, explore the community, and people in the community can share that history. And from the map that we created, there's actually now an online app where you can scan a QR code and explore various historical sites in Overtown. And so this community-based participatory mapping is how we can begin to define communities both qualitatively and quantitatively. So I've been working with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice here throughout the Gulf Coast regions. And we begin by asking, what are the good things about our community? Now, I confess, as a cartographer, as a GIS specialist, I've done a lot of pathology mapping. What's pathology mapping? Where's all the crime in the community? Where are all the toxic waste sites? Where are all the dumps? And people in the community started to say, hey, wait a minute. Why don't we map the good things about our community so that we can replicate them? Because when we start to replicate what's good, that's where we get closer and closer to what? The beloved community, you know. So there are some good things, you know. How can we replicate these good land uses? We have to take a different approach. You know, how can we see things that might be seen negative and look at them in a positive light? One of the things that we do is we walk through the community. We don't walk through our neighborhoods anymore. It's amazing what you find out when you actually walk through your community. There are people in some of these community walks that would say, I need to find a reading program for my child. Reading program was right down the street. But if you're driving by at 35 miles per hour, you'll never see it, right? You'll never see it. We had people whose children were at a school that had an after-school reading program. Didn't know anything about it, okay? So this is what we do. I call it no tech. Technology can be very intimidating to some people. Start talking about apps and maps, and technology, tech. Some people get very, very afraid. You say, no, we're gonna start off with no tech. Just gonna walk around our community, take notes on pen and paper. You know, eventually we'll end up with an electric interactive map. But the first step is this. This is in the Buzzard Point neighborhood in Washington, D.C., which is a community that's being encroached upon by a soccer stadium and a baseball stadium. And and really, even though I might lead the walk, I don't define what is, I don't tell people what is not an asset. I assume that these people would think that the Nationals baseball stadium was not an asset. They said, oh no, absolutely, my son works there, he sells concessions. So it provides jobs for young people. Oh, okay, even though the stadiums themselves are really the spark for the gentrification. But while they're there, they do, where else can a 16-year-old get a job, right? 15-year-old get an actual job selling concessions. And there are lots of baseball games and soccer games. So what do we see? I talked about a vacant lot. Normally, when you see a vacant lot like this, it doesn't bring anything positive to mind. You think, look at this empty space. This is depressing. But when we start to do asset mapping, when we start to do community-based asset mapping, we start to think, well, what else could be here? And you might think, oh, we can't do anything about this. Sometimes all it takes is a phone call, right? How many people know what an absentee landlord is? Anybody? What is an absentee landlord?
Somebody who's collecting checks, but they don't live in the city.
Yeah, so an absentee landlord is someone who might own this lot in Nashville, but live somewhere in Miami. and told his or her grandchildren, look, I want you to make sure that this lot is used for something useful. And the grandkids say, yeah, yeah, granddad, yeah, pop, pop. We got you, pop, pop. Pop, pop doesn't see this. What's happening on my property? Oh, we got a farmer's market out on that property every weekend, pop, pop. You do? Oh, yeah, yeah, yes, sir. Yes, sir. All you have to do is go down to the tax assessor's office, find out who owns the property, make a phone call. Mr. Jones, yeah. You plan on doing anything with your vacant lot? Vacant lot? My grandchildren said there's a farmer's market. No, sir. No, sir. Would you like for there to be a farmer's market there? Would you allow it? Oh, absolutely. A week later, farmer's market set up on this property, right? That's how fast it can happen. One phone call can change this into something completely different. A farmer's market that could be used to mitigate the negative impacts of food deserts, or an urban garden, or a playground for children, or a green space. One phone call to an absentee landlord who might not have any idea what's going on here can change the reality of that situation very easily. Doesn't take a whole lot of heavy lifting. And this is pretty obvious. We can look at this and say, look at this eyesore, this dilapidated, broken down properties. Maybe we should just tear it down, or maybe not. Maybe with the proper investment from an anchor institution such as Ecology University, we can turn this into perhaps a business incubator so that students at the University of South Alabama can learn how to operate business. I'm not trying to, just because the president's in here. But this actually has happened at Morgan State University in Baltimore. My father's alma mater actually bought a strip mall, and the College of Business is using it to teach entrepreneurship, something that really isn't taught in college, right? Not really. Also in Atlanta, probably one of the best examples of an anchor institution developing property such as this is Georgia State University, which is basically taken over downtown Atlanta. They made a conscious decision to become a residential campus. It used to be a commuter campus. Show up to school, leave, right? Now they have dorms and all kinds of things going on. A lot of properties like this around Georgia State University are viable now. It used to be not very viable. So we're looking at assets in a different way in order to improve our community and our quality of life, instead of just looking at everything in negative terms, negative sense. So fast forward again, I started working in this community specifically around 2016, and the main objective was environmental justice or environmental injustice mitigation. And so we did asset mapping with Major Joe Womack and other members of CHESS, and just regular folks going out in the community and, with my students producing these maps so that they could visualize not only the amenities, but also some of the potential threats to the community that were there. And again, these are not experts. These are just regular folks. And we came down and we trained them. And my objective as a trainer is to eliminate the need for me. I can't fly down to Mobile or Pensacola every week. Ideally, I would like to train these individuals, and then they can use these tools to empower themselves. I don't want to have to always be there. Some of you all probably, I don't know, they have driving school down here. You wouldn't want your driving instructor to be needed in your car after you got your license, right? You're on a date or whatever, and here's your driving instructor in the back seat, you and your date, right? The driving instructor's job is to eliminate your need for him or her so that you can drive that car yourself safely. And so we're able to do it. One of the methods that I've incorporated in creating this replicable model is the utilization of people, some of the people like you all, young people, right? A a lot of community-based organizations are dominated by baby boomers who are not babies anymore. I'm the last of the boomers. I was born in 1964. So people my age and older retire. They don't want to just sit around the house. They want to do something. So they join faith-based organizations. They join community-based organizations. And baby boomers are great. We have a wealth of knowledge. We have lots of resources. Even today, the baby boomer generation controls about 70% of the wealth in this country. Some of you Xers and millennials and Generation Y, you kind of know that, right? You know, still control about 70%. So we have a wealth of resources, but we boomers can kind of suck the air out of the room sometimes, you know? And you young people, you try to join an organization like this, just look at the image. Now don't count, these two are my students, don't count them, but I know you really can't see gray hair, more gray hair, more gray hair, right? Now, the good thing is boomers, there's a wealth of resources. The bad news is when it comes to technology, I remember, maybe nobody else in this room remembers, might be before your time. I remember when PCs were invented. Sure, none of you all remember that, right? I remember that. I used to work for the federal government when PCs, look, when I was in college, you know what a computer looked like? A computer was as big as, see where it all, that was a computer. And you get in line and you'd be number like 500 in the line. You get your pillow and sit and you creep up and then you got to log in for an hour. Now, only thing I can say, I was spared the punch cards. My dad used to tell me about the punch cards. Thank goodness. I didn't have to do the punch cards. That was a year before I went to college. Ask your grandparents about punch cards. You just be happy, okay? But yeah, but then all of a sudden you have these things called personal computers that fit on your desk. And it seems like that was just yesterday. It seems like 1 minute we had these big computers and the next thing you know, bam, we've got these things, right? There's a town in North Alabama called Huntsville. There's a rocket center. Anybody here have ever been there? Yeah, have you seen that Saturn rocket? I couldn't believe how big that thing is. Do you know that you all have more computing power in this than it took to send that thing to the moon? I mean, in this right here in your hand, more computing power here than it took. I can't describe you how big that thing is. Like, I have more power in this than to launch this. It's in 3 or 4 buildings. That's how big the rocket is, right? But it seems as if that happened overnight. I can vividly remember looking at something called a black and white TV. Yes, there was such a thing. And watching Neil Armstrong land on the moon. I remember that vividly. And it seemed like in the blink of an eye, now we're here. These things, satellites, GPS. And so technological advances happen very fast for those of us who happen to be boomers. And so a lot of us are kind of scared of these things. You know, no, I just got this last year, right? I've only had a smartphone for 1 year. I still have my flip phone. The only reason I got this is because I bought it with HBCU COVID relief money. Because when we went to a virtual environment, it's much easier to communicate with my students by texting, or they can text me. This is a 24/7, help. You can text me at 3 o'clock in the morning. If I happen to be up, I will text you back. And it was very stressful. I don't have to tell you students, very stressful when you're in a virtual space. I had students that would text me in the middle of the night, I'm done, Dr. Padgett. I quit, I'm not doing this anymore. I text them back, call me, and I talk them off the ledge. Hang in there. Everybody's going through this pandemic. It's global, it's not just you. So that's the only reason. Before that, I had a flip phone. People would laugh, Dr. Padgett, is that a pager? No, it's not a pager. I didn't want to have a flip phone. I didn't want to have this. It's too much. I mean, like, people can track you on these, right? When I had my flip phone, my girlfriend, where are you at, David? I'm at the store. Okay. Now, where are you at, David? I'm at the store. No, you're not. You're at the club. Didn't like them. And then the navigation as a geographer, the navigation was insulting. I used to hate when I'd be driving and somebody would pull one of these out. Can we? No, don't put that away. Let me get my paper map out. What happens when you lose connectivity? What happens when your cell phone dies? Then what are you going to do? You need to learn how to use a paper map, you know. So even I was kind of nervous, as much in the tech as I am. I didn't want this. It all happened very fast with boomers. And so when we start to work in these groups, I tell them, look, get the young people involved. It's a great marriage because the elders have the knowledge of the community, but the young people have the technological skills. So you can build these maps, right? We were working on some maps in the lower Ninth Ward in New Orleans. I was working with some of my fellow boomers. We were trying to develop a map of catch basins or sewer outfalls. And so we were trying to develop and adopt the catch basin program so that community-based organizations could take responsibility for unclogging the drains. Because if the drains clog in a city that's under low sea level, you're going to have constant flooding, even if there's a little bit of rain. And the city of New Orleans can't keep up with it. It's just like adopt a highway, except it's adopt a catch basin. But the first thing we had to have was a map of the catch basins. So I'm working virtually, this is before the pandemic, with my fellow boomers. We're not getting anywhere. Nowhere. 2 months, 3 months. Come on, man. Dr. Padgett, I can't figure it out. I said, one of you has to have a nephew that goes to Dillard, Southern, or Xavier University. One of them did have a nephew, 20 years old, was a student at Xavier. 2 hours. This young man had never used GIS in his life. 2 hours, we had the map up, right? Now, he didn't understand why we were doing it until after it was done. And actually, he's still involved with that. He is still involved. So it actually gave him some agency towards solving problems in his community. Whereas before, he might have been told, you know, sit down, young man, and be quiet. You know, young people be seen and not what? Heard, not heard. Some of y'all remember that, you know. But the technology allows for very young people to have agency. Even youngsters in middle school have an unbelievable grasp of technology. And I don't have any kids. Some of my friends, kids have little 3 years old, got little iPads. Like, what are you doing with an iPad? You're 3, you know. But the kids are 2 years old on, you know, screens. It's unbelievable. You know, in something called pre-kindergarten. What's pre-K? Because I don't have any kids. My friends started talking about before kindergarten. I didn't go to kindergarten. I went to kindergarten. You know, where you got dropped off, you got a peanut butter and jelly sandwich, nap, go outside, got another peanut butter sandwich, another nap. Where's your mom at? When she coming? When your mama coming? That was it. There was no curriculum, right? So these young people are amazing now in what they can do. And so we like to involve them in these trainings along with their elders. It's a very, very effective marriage. Fast forward again, of course, 2019, the flotilla is discovered or rediscovered. And again, most of you, of course, flotilla front page cover feature story in the February 2020 National Geographic magazine. All kinds of attention comes to Africatown. 60 Minutes is here. National Geographic magazine is here. People are writing books, so on and so forth. And so the stakeholders in Pritchard and other communities near Africatown want to create a viable heritage tourism site. So that there are people who want to come. There are people who come here now to see Africatown and without realizing that the visitor center is not here yet. Things are being developed, but the visitor center is not quite here yet. It's going to be here soon. I think there's a museum that's under construction now. And so these things are coming. But the history of the Clotilda in Africatown is unique. There's no place else in the United States like it. There's no place else where people can say, my great-great-grandfather came over here on a ship from this village in Africa. Nobody else can say that. No 23andMe, no African ancestry. You know, I can look at the stories have been passed down through a couple of generations back to where my relative made that middle passage, right? Nobody else can say that except here. An absolutely unique case. And so why not turn that into something that could be shared with the nation, with the world, literally. Let me give you an example of heritage tourism. Probably the best example of heritage tourism is a place called Colonial Williamsburg, Virginia. Anybody been there?
Yeah.
Colonial, that's a different kind of heritage, but still, that's heritage tourism. You know, I grew up in Baltimore. That was the field trip on the Colonial Williamsburg, and it was problematic for a while because one thing that was missing from Colonial Williamsburg were African people. And so you had one set of Black parents that says, look, this is a lie. Of course, there were African people in Williamsburg. And then you had another set of Black parents that were like, I don't want my kids to see that. I don't want my children to see that we were enslaved. But the compromise was that all of the scientific, agricultural, and architectural achievements developed by African Americans were on display in Colonial Williamsburg. You know, what some parents thought was, you know, they were going to have just Black people out picking cotton in the field. You know, no. You know, I mean, African Americans were masons. African Americans were architects, carpenters. Have you ever wondered why to be a carpenter or bricklayer you have to take a test to get a license? You ever wonder why that is? Think about it. Why do you have to take a test to be a carpenter, to saw wood? You know why? You know who the best carpenters or the best smiths? You know that smithing is metalworking, but what do they call it? Blacksmithing. Gee, why is it blacksmithing? Because guess who did the work? And so after emancipation, if somebody wanted to have metal work done or have carpentry work, who were the best people? African men, specifically. But, you know, white men couldn't compete with that. So guess what? What is it that Black men couldn't do? Couldn't read or write. Oh, boy, let me give you a test. Eliminate the competition. That's why. And you also should look up the history of all these standardized tests while you're at it, too. You know, gee, wonder when that came along. You know, so Colonial Williamsburg was second only to Disney World in terms of popularity, in terms of tourist sites. Let me repeat that. Colonial Williamsburg was second only to the mouse, and the mouse rules, right? And when you go to the mouse wants all of your what?
Money.
Mouse wants all your money, not some of it. Mickey and Minnie just, they got you. You go down, he just says, here you go, Mickey, Minnie, Goofy, see Pluto, what else you need? Right? So imagine if we had a site focusing upon the heritage of Africatown, which is every bit as significant as Williamsburg, right here. Bed and breakfast, hotels, so on and so forth. And not only that, and this is where we get into the beloved community. So there was a concept being developed called the Africatown Connections Blueway, not a greenway, but a blueway. You know, there's lots of water around here. There are lots of opportunities for recreation in and around some of the sites, such as where Africans, the people of Africatown conducted baptisms. You know, so there's a mixture of history and recreation that can not only be a learning activity, but also engage people in physical activity, right? So that's what the Africatown Connection Blueway was all about. So I got involved with the Blueway project, and then the National Park Service, which is a partner on the project, said, we don't have a map. Well, they had a map, it was a PDF. They didn't have an interactive map of the Africatown Connection Blueway. I said, we are the National Park Service. They said, well, we're the cultural resource arm. We don't have the technological capacity to develop that map. So I said, guess what? My students in my urban geography class, that's going to be their class project. And so ever since I've taught, I don't believe in giving students busy work. You know, I'm gonna give you something that's you can take and you build this map and you can log in. And if somebody asks you, are you able to use GISc? I see on your resume that it says here that you're able to use this tool. Be prepared, people. When you go to interview, be prepared to sit down in front of a computer and have somebody show you right then and there what you can do. Because this might come as a shock to you. People lie on their resume like rugs, right? And then they get on the job and they get exposed. And now the employer has wasted a lot of time and money on that person. So instead of that, you say you can do this, sit down in front of this computer and let's see what you can do. So I never do busy work. This is actually, so my students in 3 weeks and in a virtual classroom format were able to build this interactive map of the 14 points of interest on proposed Africatown connection Blueway in a 3-week May master course. I was so proud of those students. They're the best classes I ever had. You know, as an instructor, you know, you have some classes that you like to forget, and then you have some classes that you're like, can y'all come back next fall and take all my classes? You know, what are y'all doing next fall? How about next spring? This class, they didn't complain. They just worked. They didn't ask me why do we have to do this? They just did it. They just worked and literally killed it. And actually, this is a tool that's being used by the National Park Service. So this is what we call service learning. It's when students perform a service that organizations such as the Park Service and GISc ordinarily couldn't do for themselves. But at the same time, the experience that these students went through in building this map shows that they acquired skill. And I always tell my students this. My students ask me, Dr. Padgett, can you grade this? Can you grade that? I said, no, don't worry about your grades. Don't ask me about your grades. The last thing you should be doing is worry about your grades during the semester. How many of y'all saw a Super Bowl a few years ago with the Patriots and the Falcons? It was 28-3. What's the last thing that the Falcons should have been looking at? Looking at the scoreboard. That's your grades. Look at how well we're doing. Look at how well we're doing. The Patriots didn't look at the scoreboard. If the Patriots had looked at the scoreboard, they would have done what? Well, this is over with. 28-3, 3 minutes left in the third quarter. Gee, what are my vacation plans? Okay, Tom, where are we going golfing? Then you look at the scoreboard. Keep grinding, keep going as hard as you can. Don't worry about the scoreboard. There's a disconnect in this country right now between credentials and degrees. 70% of the jobs in this country require a 4-year college degree. Only 30% of people in this country have a 4-year college degree, right? So it's not really about the credentials, it's about what you can do. So don't worry about your grades, what can you do? I'd rather hire a 2.8 student that has skills than a 4.0 student who can't do anything, right? And I hear you, my students talk. Take Dr. So-and-so, y'all. I went 3 times, got a B. Don't take Dr. I love Dr. So-and-so. She's so nice. I hardly went and I got a B. That's gonna catch up to you. Tell you what, go on to ratemyprofessor.com and look me up, Dr. Padgett. I think my rate is 2.0 out of 5. I don't like, he gives us too much work. That's what they say at first, till they come back for homecoming. Dr. Padgett, I'm so glad that I know I failed your class 3 times, but you didn't lower your standards. You showed me that lowering one's standards is not the right way to go. And I grew up a lot, after I got back in school. So skills, what can you do? I've never been asked, what grades did you get in the class and job interview? Ever. What grades did you get in never. Can you do this? Can you do that? Skills, it's about skills. Not that grades aren't totally unimportant, but they're not nearly as important as skills. Focus on your skills. Now, this is interesting. We kept on. So my students continued, and I brought on Dr. Claire Grove, who is here, who is an FAA licensed drone pilot, to shoot high resolution aerial photographs of each of the points of interest along the Blueway, and then put those into a map. Now, what's interesting about Dr. Grove, she's an amazing person. She's an OBGYN who, she still is an OBGYN, but she became something that's called an empty nester. You know, some of you all who left home, your parents started partying. You're the youngest to leave the house, they were doing electric slide or whatever it is, boot scoot, whatever it is y'all do. And y'all, they cried, oh, my baby, oh, we're sorry to see you go to Alabama. Oh, we're sorry. And after you left, they were like, hey, kids are gone. It's time to live our best lives now. So she, after her 2 children were growing out of the house, decided to become an FAA certified drone pilot. What's special about that? You have to have that kind of a certification in order to do commercial drone work, like serious work, such as the work we were doing on the Blueway, excuse me. You know, there are some people who are in the drone business, like, you know, you could go to Best Buy yourself a drone and do aerial photographs of people's weddings and birthday parties. People might like that. Everybody look up at the drone. You could charge people money to do that. That's not commercial drone work. This is. 95% of the individuals who hold this certification are men. 95%. And Dr. Grove is an African-American female certified drone pilot. We're talking unicorn territory, right? And she's very personal. She's such a great role model to the young ladies that we work with, as somebody who, you know, can do everything. You can be a medical doctor, you can do tech, you know, don't limit yourself as a woman in what you can do. You know, it shouldn't be 95% of people who hold the certification being men, when half of humanity, 51% of humanity is women. So we did this, you know, these high resolution images, and so that we produced another map of, and these images are requested by, among others, the Africatown International Design Idea Competition. So as these sites are developed, landscape architects are creating visions of how these sites might look in the future. And so they had to have those high resolution aerial photographs so that they could actually see what's on the ground. They were trying to use Google Maps, but you know, when you zoom in too far on a Google map, what happens? It pixelates. So you have to have a much more higher quality image. And also recently, Major Joe Womack requested the images as they are attempting to have Africatown included amongst the list of endangered historic sites. They had to have high resolution aerial photos. And so all of these are community-based participatory maps that essentially will improve the quality of life of the community in Mobile: recreation, green space, business, urban, historic, heritage tourism. All of these efforts will result in presumably an improved quality of life right here. Again, imagine if Africatown became a tourist site on the level of Colonial Williamsburg. It could happen. It is happening. It's not could happen. It is happening right now. This place might look a lot different than it does right now. And again, we want this to be an indigenous development, you know, not people coming in from the outside, building up Africatown so people in the community have to pay to tour their own neighborhood. And that does happen sometimes. Acknowledgements, of course, Dr. Robert Bullard and Beverly Wright, Major Joe Womack, Liz Smith from the National Park Service. My students, of course, couldn't have done this without them, and Dr. Claire Grove, drone pilot. So thank you for coming out on a Monday evening. I know you could be a lot of places. The most valuable thing you can ever give anybody is your time. You'll never get this hour back, no matter what you do. So that's the most valuable thing you can give is your time. You'll never get it back. So thank you for being here. There's lots of places you could be. Well, the game hadn't started yet, but you Cowboys fans probably don't want to watch any more football. Sorry. Thank you very much. If anybody has any questions, I'll take paper.
Let's give Dr. Padgett a hand. Some questions, and we also got some time from folks on Zoom. If you want to type them, Dr. Laura Morena is going to interpret those for us too. Questions for Dr. Padgett?
We're getting a lot of thanks on Zoom, of course, Dr. Padgett, for this wonderful, wonderful talk. So thank you. And there were some folks trying to respond to your questions on Zoom. So you were doing a good job with that, actually.
How about folks who are here? Yes, Dr. Billington?
Hi there. Thank you so much for your presentation. And one of the things we worked on last semester was an asset map of our faculty and staff in diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so now we're at the point where we're looking to really take those assets and sort of really think about moving back into our USA community. Do you have any sort of thoughts around the actual application of once you find and you identify the map, what are some of the next steps in terms of utilizing that map and making sure that, you know, you're doing that in a way that's culturally responsive as well as community engaged?
Well, one of the things that I did at Tennessee State University was I got an anonymized list of the addresses of everybody, students, faculty, staff on campus, because the question was whether or not we meaning Tennessee State University, invest in property in and around the university. In many cases, historically Black colleges and universities are in disenfranchised neighborhoods. Tennessee State University is no different. And so the problem was that as housing became less and less affordable in Nashville, people, especially staff and students who didn't live on campus, were having to move farther and farther and farther out in order to find affordable housing, which places a strain when you add in transportation costs. Yes, your housing is cheap when you move out, but when you build in the cost and wear and tear on your automobile, assuming you have one, it becomes quite difficult. So the question was, well, what would happen if we invested in property in and around campus and brought those students, faculty, staff back around that's the way it used to be prior to integration, desegregation, you know, all the African-American faculty, staff, everybody lived in that neighborhood. But of course, as things changed, 1968 Housing Rights Act, people moved out and away. We had more freedom to move away. It really left behind only those who couldn't afford to move. And so therefore, the housing stock and quality decreased. We had a lot of crime around the community that eventually encroached upon the campus to the point that we finally had the fence in the campus. Didn't want to do that, but we had a young man who was not a student at Tennessee State, but still it was a life. He was visiting and he was killed on campus. And that was like the final straw. And the president put up the gate. So what I found was that the overwhelming majority of our faculty, staff, and students lived nowhere near the neighborhood around Tennessee State. But by my calculations, if we only got 10% of those who moved away to live in and around TSU, not all of them, if just 10% of them living around TSU, it would change the face of the community. Because with residential development comes commercial development. So once you start to see residential development pop up, now you would see grocery stores, maybe all the other things that used to be there when that was a vibrant African-American community, say 50 years ago. Now the problem is there's the dream, and then there's reality. And so Tennessee State University is now 70% tuition funded. 70%, only 30% of our funds come from the state. And so we, for a variety of reasons, the recession, this, that, and the other, have had either flat or decline in enrollment, while other institutions around us, such as Middle Tennessee State University, Austin Peay State University, have grown. And so when you have less students, there's less tuition, which means there's less money, and you don't have the money to invest in property. As I mentioned Georgia State. So Georgia State University has grown significantly in terms of its student population. And so that generated the funds that they would use, they can use now to invest in all those properties around the campus. And so we're challenged by a lot of things that limit our ability to make those kind of investments. And the kind of money we're talking about is significant. There was a mall in Nashville called 100 Oaks Mall. Maybe 20 years ago, it was the mall. You had to go to, I'm sure there's a mall around here that's the mall. And then it died. I mean, died. Now it's vibrant because Vanderbilt University invested $100 million into that mall and put part of their medical center there. Yeah, if we had $100 million at TSU, we wouldn't even be having this conversation. But how do we generate that kind of money? It's very difficult. I was talking to Dr. Jackson on the way over here. One of our most famous graduates is Oprah Winfrey. Yes, Oprah Winfrey graduated from Tennessee State University. I mean, she wouldn't even have to give us any money. She could just bleed blue and white like a lot of our alumni. But for whatever reason, she really has not been supportive. It's a mystery. I don't understand what happened. Something happened. I know somebody that is in Oprah's circle who said that, you know, once you get on her bad side, that's it. She's not a second chance type of person. Might be true, might not be, but she's in recent years has made a few acknowledgments that she actually is a graduate of Tennessee State University, but not the kind of investments that you see. Say, there's an attorney in South Florida that graduated from Shaw. Can't remember his name. He's given tens of millions of dollars to Shaw University. Willie Gary has given tens of millions of dollars to Shaw University. We haven't seen that as far as I know from Oprah, unless it's some kind of top secret. But I know that's a long answer to your question, but that's one of the things that I did with the map was show what could happen if we were to bring people back to the community around the school.
Other questions?
There's a question in the chat. So Doug Perkins says it's great to hear more about your work, David. How would you assess North Nashville as a beloved community? So.
Wow, Doc, I know Dr. Perkins. That's a dissertation. How much? Wow. Beloved community. In terms of this, well, North Nashville is the historical heart of the Black community. That's where Fisk, Tennessee State University, and Meharry Medical College are located. Speaking of Fisk University is where Nashville gets its nickname. What's Nashville's nickname? Music City. A lot of people think that's because of what kind of music? Nope, it's because of the Fisk Jubilee Singers. And so there was a period of time where Fisk was in financial trouble and the Fisk Jubilee Singers went all over the world. And one of the queens of England said, their voices are so beautiful, they must come from a music city. And that's long before country music. That's where Nashville got its nickname as Music City. Country music came later. So there's, any of you ever hear of a guy named Jimi Hendrix? Rumor here has it that, not rumor, history shows that Jimi Hendrix was a soldier stationed at Fort Campbell outside of Nashville, and he learned how to play the guitar in the clubs on Jefferson Street. So there's a rich history there. I can go on and on and on and on. Unfortunately, some things have happened. Interstate 40 was built straight through the Jefferson Street corridor, decimated the community in the 1960s. Thousands of homes were lost, churches, businesses, and the community really has not recovered since then. There's been a lot of efforts to bring Jefferson Street back. The key is revitalization without gentrification. How do you revitalize a community without robbing it of its character? Right? Very difficult to do. Very difficult to do. A lot of my friends from Memphis, African-American friends, just really do not like Beale Street. Like Beale Street is a cartoon character compared to what the real Beale Street was, right? So what you don't want is Beale Street. And it's very difficult to do. There was an instance where I was actively involved in bringing a mainstream grocery store to the North Nashville community. Sounded like a good idea, right? The community fought against it. And we said, well, why would you not want a neighborhood Walmart? Why would you not want a Dollar General grocery store? They said, well, if my grandmother used to go to Mr. Jones's grocery store down here on the corner, and my mother went to Mr. Jones's grocery store down on the corner, now I take my child to Mr. Jones's grocery store down on the corner, and let's say this month I'm a little short. I say, Mr. Jones, can I get some groceries on credit? Oh yeah, baby girl, you go on ahead. I knew your mom and your grandma. I know you'll have it when you come back. Try that at Winn-Dixie. What's going to happen? Woo! Right? So the fear was, it is the fear in many places that once you bring a Walmart in, what happens to all the little mom and pop, locally owned stores? Gone. And so they said, we would rather have these stores that have been in our lives, even though they're not the best stores in the world, they're not pretty, they're not Walmart, but we know these people. We'd rather have that than Walmart. And so it's very difficult, you know, it's very difficult to balance that, you know, to create a beloved community and add all these amenities, and then yet still have the character, still have the small businesses, right. Still have the little pie store where Miss Jenkins sells pies instead of, you know, Winn-Dixie's plain old pies, right? I mean, all of you know about the pie lady, right? Right? You know, when you go home, when I go home for Christmas in Baltimore, and I'm going out, you know, we don't go to the grocery store to get the pie. We go to the pie lady. Then there's the stuffing lady, right? All over Baltimore, you know. And so it's those kinds of businesses that give you community character, so it doesn't look like every other community in the United States. Where can you go in the United States where there's not a Walmart, you know, or not a Walgreens, or not a Dollar General store? You know, that's not what gives you community character. You know, you want to know that if you're in Mobile, Alabama, oh, I'm in Mobile because I don't know what some of the local places are. There's this, there's that. But if all that gets wiped out, then you've got this monolith of just sameness that just takes away the character of the beloved community.
I have a question for you, Doc.
Yeah.
So could you talk about terms like democratizing when you talk about geospatial tech? Why that term?
Yeah, well, we know that the technology, unfortunately, is not in the hands of everybody equal, even though it can be game changer. And so I can give you one case study. I'm working in the community in Pensacola, Florida, called Wedgwood, and with the Deep South Center for Environmental Justice. And that community has 13 landfills in and around this Black community. And you're like, how in the world do you have a community with 13 different landfills? Well, this Florida, you know, a lot of these landfills were 60, 70, you know, it's just people just didn't have, the Black people didn't have the agency that they do now. And so, but the landfills aren't going anywhere. And even today, there's people still trying to permit new landfills in this community. And so not too long ago, there was a plan to build a 4-lane highway through the Wedgwood community. But individuals, individual members of Unity in the Family Ministry, which is a wonderful organization. I can't even tell you how great they are. You know, Reverend Avant, Pastor Greer, and many others took a set of maps to the Escambia County Commission meeting. I wasn't there. I didn't want to be there, but I didn't need to be there because they use those maps to show that if this road is built, it's going to not only destroy Wedgwood's quality of life, it's going to destroy everybody's quality of life. Highway was shut down, just like that. And so that's democratizing the technology, taking the technology into people who are not technical experts, but are still able to empower themselves to affect change in their communities. And the technology is, it's easy to understand if it's explained correctly. And always tell my students, don't worry about the technology. Worry about what you want the technology to do. What do you want the technology to do? Some of you all may or may not remember this, but I remember when calculators first came on the scene. Remember that, right? So it used to be that we could do fractions, long division. Remember that? Or square roots by hand. Remember that? Remember those days? You tried to do some long division lately? Have you ever tried to balance your checkbook lately? You're like, wait a minute, I carried a one. We get so spoiled and we get weakened by this technology, to the point that we really don't know what it does. And so when I teach my class, even it might be the most highly technical class that I teach, like a GPS class, we have no technology. None. We go out with a paper map and a compass. And my students said, Dr. Padgett, when are we going to get the text? No. If you don't understand how this compass works, this paper map, you definitely aren't going to understand GPS. Because technology does what? Sometimes technology is wrong, right? But if you don't understand what lies beneath the technology, the philosophical ends of it, and you get the wrong answer, you can become very lost. I'm sure just Google Maps errors or Google Maps led astray, and you'll see all kinds of cases. There are some cases where people have literally been killed because they're so busy following the little navigation in their phones and their cars, they drive right into a lake or drive right over a cliff. Because at the end of the day, how are those maps made? They're made by who? Human beings. Human beings make what? Mistakes all the time. So we cannot, so I tell people in cartography, the art and science of map making, we have to understand what the ingredients of the maps are before you can really understand what the computers are doing. Very important in anything. Even when I've had little kids to take them out, when we do weather experiments, using some regular plain old liquid filled thermometer. Yeah, you can go online and go to a weather station on Weather Underground and get the temperature and humidity and all that right off the internet. Yeah, you could do that. But what does it really mean? What does it mean when today there wasn't a cloud in the sky today, right? Why is that? Right? Why is that? Why are there no clouds in the sky today? Or even if you look in the sky sometimes and they're real puffy clouds, right? Why are those clouds puffy? So when we start to talk, you can't get that by looking at a readout on the Weather Channel, right? You can't get, you have to understand, you have to go outside. And that's one of the funny things. I teach weather and climate. And I tell my students, oh, we're going outside today. And they say, outside? They go outside? It's changed so much. When we used to get punished, we would get brought inside. You don't get to go outside. You're punished, young man. Now you punish kids by, oh my gosh, what's that bright thing in the sky? It's hot. It's just, So no, we're not going to study weather and climate inside. We're going to go outside. We're going to feel it. We're going to smell it. We're going to feel it. So that we understand what these very technical weather stations are doing by doing everything by hand. Everything by hand first. And so that's democratizing, breaking it down so that everybody can understand it. And I tell my students all the time, I say, look, when they give their presentations, I'm like, imagine that your grandmother's in the audience, depending on who your grandmother is. Now, if your grandmother has a PhD in physics, that's one thing. But if she just maybe worked in the cafeteria at your school or drives a school bus or what have you, and you're trying to explain all this fancy smashy book learning you learned at TSU, you got to be able to explain that to her. She can understand it, but if you can't understand all this book learning that you have, to her, you're no good to anybody. I can understand it, but she understands. because the majority of people that you're going to be helping, and that's what we hope you do, is take, when you graduate, all you're gonna get is information. You're not gonna get a car, you're not gonna get a trip to Europe, not from Alabama State, Southern Alabama, University of South Alabama, all these USAs. All you're gonna get is information. And all we hope is that you take that information and make the world a better place. That's it. That's all you're gonna get. For all this money you're spending, the government's money, your parents' money, somebody's money. So all you get is information. You hope you take that information and make the world a better place. But most people in the world are not like you. Like I said, only 30% of the people in this country have a 4-year college degree. Only 30%. Most of the people that you work with in psychology or teaching or nursing are not going to have that high level book learning that you do, but you still have to explain it to them. Have you ever gone to the doctor and they explain what's wrong with you and you're sitting there like, what did you just say? Am I going, what's going on here? You ever had a doctor like that? Then you go to another doctor to kind of explain, oh, wow, so you mean I'm really sick, you want somebody like that can went to medical school or all that high technical, difficult stuff about the body, but can explain it to you in ways you can understand so that you know, okay, I'm not as sick as I thought, or yeah, we got a long way to go before I recover, right? So let's give it up to Dr. Padgett.
Thank y'all for coming out. African American Studies appreciate your presence. Take care now.
Getting more thanks on Zoom, of course.
Dr. Padgett, great job.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so
Thanks for
much.
coming out.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, that was incredible.
I'm
late to be for the box 10. We can I can do it now or.
You
Okay, let's do it.
Thank you.
Really?
Thank you.